Canada stands with the Iranian people in their long and courageous struggle against this oppressive regime, and we reaffirm Israel's right to defend itself. Canada supports the United States acting to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon and to prevent its regime from further threatening international peace and security. And the Canadian government urges the protection of all civilians in this conflict.
That's the Prime Minister speaking yesterday from Mumbai. He is on a major trade mission in the region. Do want to bring you some breaking news, though, that's coming in just now, that 3 U.S. service members have been killed as part of this operation in the Middle East. 5 others were injured. It is an operation that the United States is calling Operation Epic Fury. They say that major combat operations continue, but confirming that 3 U.S. military members have been killed as a result of this operation. We'll continue to track that. The Prime Minister there voicing, though, the government's position on the strikes in Iran, saying that Canada is taking no part in the military action. What to make of the Prime Minister's comments? What role could or should Canada play in what comes next for Iran? Let's bring in our Sunday Scrum. Catherine Lvesque is an Ottawa parliamentary reporter for the National Post. Brett Forrester is an Ottawa reporter for CBC Indigenous, and Gary Mason is a columnist for the Globe and Mail, and he joins us from Vancouver. Good to see you all. Obviously, we had other things that we were going to talk about. We will do that a little bit in the next hour, but good to get some perspective on where Canada is in this, and more particularly the Prime Minister's statement. Lots of people questioning his support for the actions taken by the U.S. President, though he made it very clear that this was about, in his view, he supported it given that it was about preventing Iran from gaining nuclear capabilities. I'll start with you, Catherine. What do you make of the position the Canadian government has taken here?
Yeah, obviously, I think, Prime Minister Carney is at the other end of the world. He had to react fast, and he didn't have all the information at the time. So I think it was a very, relatively prudent statement that he made, but also, a little surprising because he is really, there is less and less daylight right now between the Conservative position and the Liberal position. And this is certainly an example of, this is not a position I think that Justin Trudeau's government would have taken. So look, he made it clear that Canada, supported the U.S. actions in the context of preventing Iran of getting this nuclear weapon, which I think, a lot of people can agree with. But at the same time, I think Canada, has a similar position to Australia right now, who said very similar things, who also supported the U.S. actions. But at the same time, we're not exactly on the same side as some of our other allies, other middle powers like Germany, like France, like the UK, who have called for de-escalation. So I think the Prime Minister is supposed to maybe react some more today, and we'll see if he'll eventually call for de-escalation. But right now, he's, definitely supporting the U.S. in all this.
Yeah, I think we're actually going to hear from the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who is over there. They are now in New Delhi in India. I think we're going to hear from her at some point this morning, potentially. But you're right that the reaction has been different compared to some of our allies. The NDP has seized on this issue, not surprisingly, criticizing the Prime Minister for it. Brett, what did you make of it? Because there has been criticism, but there has also been some people, particularly conservative-leaning people, who are happy to see the Prime Minister say this.
Well, further to Catherine's point, I think for me, Carney's statement just raised many more questions, as obviously he was reacting to something that we are all still trying to process exactly what it is and what it means. The New York Times reported, I think at 2:30 a.m. today, that this was a CIA-assisted Israeli attack on Iran's top officials. So what exactly does Carney support, and how does he support it? If indeed the Canadian government supports this as the best way to ensure that Iran does not get access to a nuclear bomb, what does that support look like going forward? As we've repeatedly heard from military analysts, the precedent here for the U.S. in terms of decapitating regimes in the Middle East and instituting regime change that way is not a particularly successful one in Iraq, Afghanistan, and even in 2011, Libya for Canada, the precedent is a little bit different. You can think back to Chrétien in 2003 refusing to support the U.S. invasion of Iraq, ostensibly because there was no UN Security Council resolution authorizing it. And you can contrast that with Stephen Harper in 2006 and 2007 expanding Canada's combat role in Afghanistan. So I expect Carney's going to face a lot more questions about what he supports, how he supports this, and how his support for Trump's actions here line up or don't line up with his foreign policy laid out in Davos.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are all good questions, and I should be clear that the support at this stage is only in words. There's no suggestion that Canada will have any role to play. It's not even clear what we could possibly do given the state of our military. But to me, it seemed a little bit like, in relation to that Davos speech, Brett, and I'll get Gary to pick up on this, that the Prime Minister's viewpoint is sort of take the world as it is, not as you want it to be. And I wondered whether that was sort of where he was trying to get. Obviously, we'll have lots of questions for him. I think he's taking questions tomorrow in India. But Gary, give me your perspective.
Yeah, I think, he, in his Davos speech, he quoted Alexander Stubb, the head of NATO, talking about values-based realism. And I think that this is sort of a good example of that. I mean, it's easy to go on air and say, any initiative to get rid of a regime, a despotic regime that has, killed thousands of its own people, is trying to build a bomb, anything to destabilize their efforts or get rid of that regime is a good thing. But like my colleagues here have said, we just don't know what's going to come next. I mean, is there any cost to Canada in this? I mean, they've already killed, Ayatollah Khomeini. Now, I gather there's another leader that's, ready to kind of take over, but we don't know what the situation in Iran is going to be a week from now, let alone 3 months or 6 months. I know there's a lot of people in Iranian diaspora that are cheering this on, but there are like a million different scenarios of what could happen and what in the coming weeks. So, I think I said, there's a lot of people that will be kind of questioning Mr. Carney's support, but I think it's very strategic. If this thing miraculously ends pretty quickly, I think Donald Trump is going to be taking note of who stood behind him and who didn't. And I think maybe to some extent it was a calculated gamble on Mr. Carney's part to be in the side that supported Trump. And maybe it will have some sort of positive impact in trade negotiations down the road. Of course, Mr. Trump is loyal to no one, and it might mean absolutely nothing at all because there'll be a million different other things that will make him angry between now and then. But I think there was just a lot of, geopolitical calculations that went into Mr. Carney's decision.
I will say as well that the statement also leans very heavily on wanting what is best for the Iranian people, which is something that we saw reflected in the government's response to what happened in Venezuela as well. Catherine, maybe I'll just get you, though, to give your perspective on the Conservative statement. We saw one from Pierre Poilievre, particularly after the death of the Supreme Leader. He said that brings justice for the Iranian people. We actually haven't had anything, I don't think, from the Canadian government yet about the death of Khamenei. What did you make of the strong words used by the Conservative leader there?
Yeah, I mean, I was sort of expecting the Conservative leader to have the most strong statement just because he has been on the record, supporting the Iranian diaspora here in Canada. Yeah. He's been seen in protests for years now with his, deputy leader, Melissa Lantsman. So he has been very, very involved, and the entire Conservative Party has been very involved in supporting them. And so I think in that sense, it wasn't entirely surprising that he would be very much, agreeing with the U.S., but also Israel with their actions right now. And, you talked about Conservative reaction. I think it's also important to point that Jason Kenney, also said that it was a surprisingly good statement from Mark Carney. So, when I'm saying there's less and less daylight between both positions, it's obviously, Pierre Poilievre's statement was stronger, it was longer. He's not the prime minister, but at the same time, I mean, those positions are surprisingly similar in, being on side with the Iranian people and, wanting to topple this regime.
In order to make progress, you need to be at the table. And we have seen progress being made in the engagement that we have had with the government of India at the senior official level. And therefore, that is the work that we will continue to do in the short and the long term for the benefit of the Canadian population.
Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand there speaking yesterday from Mumbai. She was asked about a senior government official saying that India's transnational repression attempts were done, though she says Ottawa continues to monitor security and interference concerns. How significant a balancing act is this? We're going to bring back our Sunday Scrum. Catherine Lvesque is a parliamentary reporter for the National Post. Brett Forrester is a reporter for CBC Indigenous. Gary Mason is a columnist for the Globe and Mail. He's in Vancouver. I obviously had a lot of coverage of India for this show that unfortunately had to be tossed because of events in the Middle East. So we're going to spend a little bit of time at least talking about this because it is a significant trip. The Prime Minister, we are reporting this morning that the Prime Minister hopes to have a deal in place by next December, which would be pretty remarkable access to that market. But Gary, I'm going to start with you. That's happening amidst of obviously real concerns about how India interferes in Canadian democracy, some of the threats it makes to Sikh Canadians in this country. How do you think the government needs to walk this tightrope here?
Yeah, a tightrope indeed. Rosie, I mean, clearly the biggest priority of this government right now is trade. I mean, that is clearly the number one thing on their agenda, and everything else kind of takes a back seat to it. I mean, given the U.S. threat to our economy. So Mark Carney is out there knocking on every door, and in some respects, there's no door that's more important right now. I mean, perhaps other than China, as in terms of diversifying, than India, the most populous country on earth. They have a lot of things that they need that we sell, including energy. So there's a big deal to be had there for Canada. A province like Saskatchewan, that they've got uranium that they're prepared to sell. There seems to be a deal on the table there. Yeah. I think Scott Moe is licking his chops at that. So, I mean, there's a lot there that is very, very attractive. But at the same time, there is sort of this, again, geopolitical reality behind the scenes. And Canada has very, very legitimate concerns about foreign interference by the Indian government. They're obviously very upset about a very militant Sikh presence in Canada that they see the government of Canada not doing enough about, and consequently, alternatively, that the Sikh population in Canada views the Canadian government doing anything that sort of legitimizes the government of Mr. Modi as a problem as well. So, but right now, I would have to say, the trade deal with India is just a bigger priority than the sensitivities rather of the Sikh diaspora here in Canada.
And certainly, governments walk and chew gum all the time. I mean, you mentioned China there, right, Gary, that they have to balance things as well. I did speak with Moninder Singh on Friday, again, before all this news broke out, who received a duty to warn letter from Vancouver police just a week or so ago, saying that his life was in danger, the life of his children and his wife were in danger. And obviously, he doesn't think there are enough guardrails to protect people like him there and make this balancing act, Brett. So your sense or your perspective on how challenging it is to be doing that, knowing that there are people whose lives are potentially in danger, maybe not directly attached to the Indian government, but adjacent to some of those things, allegedly, of course.
Well, it's certainly easy to be surprised or perplexed by the abruptness and the magnitude of the 180. that Gary was just describing right there. It would be easy to argue that the Carney government has not adequately addressed the allegations put forward by his predecessor, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who stood in Parliament and leveled these accusations, prompting this major international incident. So how did they address that? They put forward an anonymous government official speaking on background to reporters who explained that this is no longer a concern. And then you had named individuals, named security and intelligence experts casting doubt on that. So it does, I think, bring us back to this discussion about value-based realism, as the Prime Minister put it in Davos, which he explained as this desire or this aim to be both pragmatic and principled at the same time. This seems to be a clear instance of that being put into practice, where the government has decided to be pragmatic as well as principled, and it's decided that the trade deal, the desire and the need to diversify trade outweighs these concerns about national security. You could argue that the government has not done a good enough job of communicating the rationale for that decision and communicating what guardrails are going to be put in place, what assurances do exist, and what evidence there is to support the claims of the government senior officials.
Yeah, and we should say that the case of the killing of Hardeep Nijjar is ongoing in terms of the investigation and the court case. So something may come out of that. But you're right, Catherine, CSIS warned just recently that India is an offender of interference at very least. So I'm not sure the government's putting that aside, but as Brett says, they're certainly making a decision here about what matters right now.
Oh, absolutely. It's just, it seems like the Hogue Commission has vanished in thin air. We're not talking about that anymore. And, we saw a clip of Minister Anand just before, and the entire scrum, she was very, very annoyed by the questions. She ended up saying, it's as if the media was suggesting that we shouldn't be here just because there are security concerns. And she said that there is some progress ongoing, and that basically you can walk and chew gum at the same time. But it's a little hard to reconcile what the minister is saying with, when you have the Indian High Commissioner to Canada saying there has never been a problem. Ask Jagmeet Singh. I don't think he would agree. And, we haven't heard from the RCMP either this week. So I think it's really difficult. I think those are questions that are going to be posed directly to the Prime Minister. And I mean, we just got his itinerary. He's going to have a media availability tomorrow, just after meeting with Prime Minister Modi. So look, to Gary's point, I think it is very clear that this government has decided that the economy is going to trump everything else, that we are going, we're really aiming to get this trade deal by the end of the year, which would be, a very impressive feat. But at the same time, I do understand there is some frustration that this position on, this transnational repression, this foreign interference been happening. It's as if, the government has decided that this is simply not a priority anymore.
I'll just give you the last minute there, Gary, in terms of whether they should be explaining this better, whether they'll do that tomorrow, maybe.
Yeah, I think they're going to be answering questions about this for a while, Rosie. But I would say this, I would say the bigger the deal that Canada and India can put together on trade, it means there's more to lose if both countries don't sort of deal with these underlying issues that are kind of threatening this whole thing. So I think both sides recognize that, and there's things that Canada can be doing. There's things that India can certainly be doing. There have to be greater guardrails, but there's a lot we could lose here if we don't get smart, and if India doesn't get smart. So I think that's kind of the bottom line right now.
Yeah, I mean, trade factors into this, you're right, in terms of how India behaves going forward. That's a possibility, to your point, Gary. Listen, thank you all. Yeah. I know we didn't do just sort of strict politics today. I asked a lot of you, so I appreciate it. Catherine, Brett, and Gary, nice to see you all.